have a shared chat for this room? No.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yes, we do. You can share. We can chat with panelists.
Okay.
Oh, I can see it. Yeah. And if there are any questions that any of the panelists would like to answer on the Q&A segment, feel free to respond. Okay. We're going to have to start now. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Yewande Abiose. I'm the Managing Director of Energy Institute Nigeria. I would like to warmly welcome you to the second edition of the Energy Dialogue. This session is proudly organized by the Energy Institute, and our aim is to help you keep up to date with industry trends. For the benefit of those that haven't heard about the Energy Institute, we are the professional membership body bringing together energy expertise. So how to explain this further? We gather and share essential knowledge about energy. We also help energy professionals further develop their skills in this changing energy landscape. We have over 30,000 members that span across 120 countries. We articulate their collective voice and we use it to create globally accepted good practice. So if you're not yet a member, I would like to invite you to join our network. Registration information will be sent to you after this webinar. Today's Energy Dialogue is themed Enhancing Sustainability for Petroleum Exploration and Production Industry, leveraging on local content. As we all know, business disruptions due to COVID-19 has prompted stakeholders to look inward and leverage on local strengths and expertise. Today, we bring to you speakers that operate businesses across Africa. We'll exchange our views and ideas on how we can overcome capacity limitations. So, to keep this session interactive, I beg your pardon, we've come up with some polling questions and they would pop up on your screen. So please take part as your insights will further enhance today's conversation. Also, remember to drop your questions just by the chat box below. So we're going to start by having presentations by all the panelists. Afterwards, we'll have a joint panel discussion and then we'll have the Q&A session. So I'd like to welcome my esteemed speakers. We have a very strong panel with vast experience and scope in the industry. I'll start by introducing Barbara Sange. She's the Global Accounts Director for Schlumberger. She's worked in the company for more than 18 years. She's held different positions from operations to management across the US, North Sea, Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. I'll move on to Dr. Kwame Banuko. He's the GM Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations at GNPC. He's responsible for matters relating to corporate affairs, social performance, and local content. He also has over 13 years experience teaching at University of Ghana. Moving on to Mrs. Anita Amoile. She's the CEO, Deep Blue Energy. She has over 25 years experience and has worked for Shell and Foster Wheeler. She rose to the position of VP and she handled different portfolios across 7 African countries. Now to my moderator for today, Professor Wumi Ledare. He's the newly appointed GNPC Professorial Chair. He works in the Oil and Gas Economics and Management Center, and he works at the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. He's the Professor Emeritus in Petroleum Economics and Policy Research at the Louisiana State University. Professor is also a fellow of the Energy Institute. So welcome to all our speakers. We're all looking forward to hearing from you today. So without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Prof. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you very much, Yewande, for inviting us. And I also really appreciate this panel. Also, I like the diversity in the panel, whereby we represent the global population distribution. We are waiting on the general manager from Ghana Petroleum Institute. And I've been given about 10 minutes to moderate this. I asked my TA to check what's the dictionary meaning for a moderator. And my job is to be able to tailor us to focus on the area in which we are really trying to go to, which is really to be able to define what petroleum, local content really is, and to be able to then explain that local content is global. Local content is global today than what it used to be. In fact, the entire industry has come to the realization that local content is probably a very good way to be able to link the industry to other sectors in the economy. So please share my presentation. So the scrambling for local content implementation in most oil and gas industry worldwide, especially the upstream, is a converging interest to be able to advance indigenous companies in oil and gas industry, as it aims to be able to increase efficiency and harness local content presence in the sector. So local content is, next slide please. Local content as a philosophy, please next slide please. Local content as a philosophy is not limited to only emerging economies. You could see that it's practiced in Norway, which is already an arrived system, but they started in the 1970s. And I wish most, and the emerging African countries that are producing petroleum now are trying to borrow from what Norway actually did. You see, the focus in Norway was on the production chain sector. In Brazil in 2003, they're looking at oil concession to make sure that indigenous are participating in oil concession. And then of course in Trinidad, Tobago in 2004, they are looking at in-country fabrication. And then if you go to Indonesia in 2009, the focus was procurement, domestic inputs. And by the time we came to Nigeria in 2010, which is a success story, then Nigeria was interested in indigenous participation and domiciliation of oil and gas activities in Nigeria. And then of course, Ghana, when Ghana came in 2013, they are interested in expanding the capacity of indigenous companies to be engaged in oil and gas. And they always look at this. Let's look at what the global definition of local content is. Basically, we don't have the next slide. We don't have a uniform definition of local content. Nearly every country has decided to focus and implement their local content based on what they want to focus at that particular time. So if you look at the typical local content goals, you will see that the key important thing is to strengthen the demand for goods and services directed to the domestic market and for employment and expansion. What we are not going to see is a situation in which people think that it's all about making millionaires in your local community. No, it's about goods and services directed to domestic market and to be able to expand employment. Employment of individuals and employment of resources that are local. Because the objective of local content is sustainability. Sustainability of the industry and sustainability of the economy. So what are the long-term goals whenever you develop a local content? Looking at all the countries that are listed that have done it before. One is diversification of the industrial sector. So basically local content is a tool to be able to diversify your industrial sector. Two, development of technology-intensive sector, which literally we expand employment and expand the use of local resources. Then sustainability sustainable growth potential. It helps you to be able to build what I call local segment of the economy, thereby actually improving national security. And finally, one of the other goals of local content is indigenous entrepreneurship, whereby you are thinking more of people with entrepreneurial spirit rather than just being traders and dealers. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So you could see then, local content is not without challenges, and that's where I have experienced panelists today who will bear into how can we resolve these challenges. One, there's a policy misinterpretation and implementation flaws. There's also what we call lack of capacity in required skill. There's a government policy that still encourages importation, which again can kill the local industry. There's also project finance and management problem. There are lack of infrastructural development. There are total dependence on foreign experts, which makes the implementation of local content a little bit difficult. And the killer of it all is transparency and accountability, whereby the process of effecting a good local content implementation strategy become an issue. And now let's go to the next slide. And then, of course, you could see the content growth and determinants for local content. It deals with assets, deal with funding, dealing with local capacity, and managing mutuality of interest. These are important important factors and determinants that can make local content successful. And of course, the final slide is the importance of human capital development if we are going to be able to fully implement and retain the benefit of local content. Human capital communication is a continuous process, and human capital formation and growth will further enhance the ability to accumulate and get investment. Domestication of workforce, competent workforce, is equally important. And so this is just going to be my opening remark. Local content is about value creation for local economy. Local content should not be looked at from a buy and sell mentality, but for value creation, added value, so that the economy can grow, because all the things that are required are found in there. And finally, what is the key requirement, which is going to be my last slide before I invite my panelists. Please, if you have questions, look at the Q&A section so that I'll be able to be able to address some of this area fully. Again, basic facilities must be there. The supply chain locally must be there. And the local services companies must be established. If you are talking in terms of the oil and gas upstream, there must be drilling rigs that is locally owned. There must be marine vessels that are locally owned, and there must be drilling tools. And then, of course, you can see skilled workforce is very important, and that's why university becomes an important ingredient to make local content very effective and successful. In-country training, in-country internship, the workforce must be able to give internship opportunity for local people to be able to bring themselves up to bear. So I want to thank you again very much for this opportunity to share our knowledge, and I'm going to invite our next panelists to share also our thoughts. Welcome, Ms. Barbara Goe. Did I call it right? Sangu.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just check that everybody can hear me. It seems everybody can hear me. Thank you for this introduction again. I want to thank you for your nice words. Indeed, today what I've chosen to do is to structure my contribution to the debate at this stage along two main points. It's basically driving upon my experience from working for a multinational to look at how typically multinational service company will contribute towards local content, how they build their strategy, and secondly, how do the local content policies from the host countries drive those strategies, and how effective they end up being relevant to making the oil and gas sector more sustainable. So if we go to my first slide, please. I don't know, I can't see it yet. Thank you very much, Toby. So the first thing I looked at when I was invited to the discussion was to go back to basics. Is what do we call a sustainable industry? And I found this description in the Schlumberger stewardship framework that I thought was very simple and easy to understand. It's basically sustainable development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. My initial thoughts would have been along just thinking of resilience, because in the business environment, we tend to think of a sustainable business is a business that withstands the test of time. And I would have missed this very important point about not compromising the future and the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. So the second thing I looked at, obviously, was how do we define local content? And I think Prof has already done a very good job at framing the fact that local content has various definitions across all the countries and all, even the scholars who have looked into the topic. But what I focused on was this we have used in past submission is adding value or creating value in the economy through a deliberate utilization of national human resources, material, and services. I also did a bit I did a bit of more digging further, and I found a World Bank report that referred to looking at the amount of spend that is done in intermediate spending in a country, and also the concept of links. So building backward links, which is using the existing industry in the country as an input in your own industry, but also creating forward links, which is being able to provide material for the other business down the chain. So with that background, then it gives me a bit more understanding of how we came about the key pillars of national content development, typically in Schlumberger. So if we look at the perspective of now being a multinational coming into a country, starting operations, how would you come about to build this national content? The first thing, Prof has mentioned it already, is investing in people. It's hiring local employees, it's planning technology and skills transfer, building capacity. Digital enablement is a key one in the terms that it gives you access to resources for training and developing your workforce, even from external resources. The next point is value creation. And that's key when going back to the definition of local content, which is you are meant to create value locally. How you do that is by partnering with local suppliers for provision of goods and services, creating economic opportunities for the local business. This is how we've been driving the point of value creation. And finally, sustainability is at the core of how we look at building a local content plan when we get into a new country and we start operation. It's about investing in the development and the growth of local service companies. So when you look at these three pillars, there are already a few things that jump in, right? When you think about hiring local employees, the expectation is there's going to be employment, there's going to be jobs created, there's going to be money injected in the economy. But a pitfall here is to stay away from what we have seen, and Prof alluded to it by mentioning creating billionaires that then go abroad and do not re-inject that wealth back into the host country. Um, Another point on the value creation is that beyond partnering with local suppliers for provisioning goods and services, we have to look at where the goods and services are manufactured and come from. It's not only about shifting the balance of you taking care of the shipment versus a local supplier bringing in now the supplies and you buying from that supplier. It's not the same thing as actually creating value locally and creating opportunities beyond the simple trade, as Prof mentioned. And finally, when we talk about developing a tissue of local service companies, today when we look at sustainability, we want to think about also sustainable work practices. So when we are going to look at partnering with local players, creating alliances, we are going to be more careful. Because if I take a very specific example in the upstream, today for a service company, partnering to create a refinery and down the line contributing to more fossil fuels being injected, maybe plastic goods created, will not have the same impact as partnering to create a liquid gas plant, for example, that will contribute to the ability for clean cooking in a country, or creating a research center that then allows for more capacity building. So these these are the initial thoughts about how sustainability is at the core of creating a local content strategy. Now, if we look a bit further and we think about sustainability from the standpoint of the company itself, how does that affect the company itself? And we would move then to the next slide. Thank you, Toby. I can't see it yet, but I assume it will be shifting soon. So if we look at company and country-wise, local content has always been a balancing act for all the actors involved, but most especially for those who are on the supplier hand, who are trying to comply with the requirements of the country they operate. It can either be seen as an opportunity or as a burden. So in my experience working in sales jobs across the world, so in Indonesia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, there is very much the perception of local content being something you comply with. It's kind of a burden that it's being put on you rather than being perceived as an opportunity, because it can affect, let's be fair, your competitivity in a given market, or for the country actually setting up the policies, your capacity to attract and external investment and foreign investment funds. So what you look at balancing would be, for example, your startup costs when you're going to initially recruit and train the local workforce versus a reduced cost of operating. Once you have a strong participation of your local workforce, you have reduced salaries. Going even beyond those costs, you also have the impact of reduced dependence from overseas resources. Next point that you would look at is the reliability of the local supply partners. And Prof also alluded to this when he said one of the key requirements would then be a strong supply chain. So it's not just about partnering to perform the work at the back of a so-called local player, but it's about making sure that there is carried equity, there is local sourcing and manufacturing, rather than just reducing logistics costs or actually increasing the landed cost of items you could have brought yourself, which doesn't result in value creation in the local environment. Another key element is compliance monitoring. And I think that's where we touch upon the questions of transparency and accountability, is how we monitor compliance, how we make sure this is not a game of just hiding behind some local ownership and there's actual value created for the local, for the host country, but also for the company now moving into this country and developing a strong network of resources. One final point that I want to mention about the balancing act here is the operational carbon footprint. I think when we mention sustainability, we all have in mind carbon footprint. Everything that we can use locally then reduce the carbon footprint of moving people and goods and equipment. So once we've looked at that balancing act, I think what I would like to finish my thought on is the effect of the policies in the sustainability. So if we move to the next slide, please. What I've done is I've looked at a few countries I've worked in across sub-Saharan Africa and how the maturity of their local content policies, my experience of the way the market is being shared between local players and multinational affect the robustness of the industry. And I've plotted for you here the evolution of the rig count as we see it internally between 2017 and expected in 2021, showing how Nigeria stands out as being strongly resilient despite the ups and down cycle of the industry. It's also classified in the World Bank report from 2003 as the country having the highest local content on intermediate spends compared to Angola, Ghana, or Gabon, which is almost non-existent. The local workforce participation in Nigeria and Angola is the highest. However, you can see that if you use the Sustainable Development Goal Index, they actually rank lower than Ghana and Gabon. So it's not just about having a strong local content being implemented in the workforce. There have to be other components, namely sustainable working practices from the participant, the local participant. That is one key challenge that I've experienced, is that the local participant will not have access to the same resources as the big players to have sustainable working practices. So another item that I wanted to mention is that what you see in Nigeria being a lot more resilient throughout the crisis is the fact that the participants are at various levels of the value creation chain. They are not just low-level suppliers, they are also operators, service companies, and low-level suppliers. So you need to have players across the chain, as opposed, for example, if you look to Angola. However, what we can learn from this plot is that the rebound might be slower in countries that have strong local content regulation because they aren't as agile as Gabon, for example, where we see maybe very susceptible to fluctuations, but at the end of the day, rigs come and go pretty fast, and they are not that exposed to a long lag time in terms of recovering their oil and gas sector after crisis. I think my final thoughts on how local content can be an opportunity to improve sustainability, it's about also using relevant KPIs. Depending on how you measure compliance to local content and you report local content, you can reflect true value creation versus simply trading and bringing goods from outside. Thank you very much.
Thank
I think
you.
I've made my point.
Excellent presentation. I'm going to be calling on Anita in a moment.
Before we go on, can we do?
I want to bring out two things that are very important. The last statement: you must define your key performance indicators excellently well. Otherwise, you may be misevaluating the performance of your local content policy. You need to balance the two: intermediate participation, which you emphasize very well, we tend to bring Nigeria ahead of other African countries, and not just measure on the basis of the number of employees, the number of money you pay your salary, and so on and so forth. Excellent observation. I'm sure we're going to come to ask you more questions for elaboration later, but that was very kind. Now I'm going to invite Mr. Sandra. Please pause a moment, because I think we want to welcome the GM Sustainable Development. Go ahead, MD. Go ahead.
Sorry, we also have our polling questions now. Can we please run one or two, Toby? Thank you very much. Okay, I think we have just a few more seconds. We need more people to participate, please. Okay, we have our answers there, so we can go ahead now. It's interesting, people's responses.
Yewande, please take note of the something, and then we can elaborate on the result towards the end of the program. And then you have opportunity to elaborate. Let me now welcome Mrs. Omanle, Anita, and I'm sure we're going to gain a lot because she is a participant in this local content, and she has actually functioned according to the introduction that we have. Again, you have 10 minutes, and when you hear my alarm or you see me again, then that means round up. Welcome again, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. As Hadley rightly mentioned in the beginning, I've been in the industry for a while, and the good thing is I started off as an operator employee before going up to being an employee of a service company, and now being a co-owner of an indigenous Nigerian company. One of the things that was very key towards the start and development of Deep Blue Energy Services was the need to ensure that local companies were not just seen as a tick in the box, as in they're not just companies that were being given opportunities because they wanted to satisfy criteria, but to ensure that value addition was actually being seen. So I'll start off by, my presentation is going to be on overcoming technical capacity limitations. I'm using Deep Blue as an indigenous entrepreneur. When the company was set up in 2009, we basically set up, sorry, can everybody hear me? Okay. When the company was set up in 2009, was set up as a fully indigenous company. We registered, got all the needed permits to be able to provide services. We studied the environment, and then we also looked at the value chain in the industry, and then took our business to start off on where we knew we already had in-house capability to be able to provide. It is very important to take note that the fact that the oil and gas sector, as we all know it, is one global standard. So we wanted to ensure that we were seen as that organization that was providing a service, not because we were local, but because we could actually deliver on the services that we had to deliver to our clients. We're mainly a consulting company. So it meant that a lot of our jobs were actually consulting and providing support for our clients. Since starting operation in 2009, meeting all the requirements for every service that we have to engage in, we've been able to develop a strong track record of executing projects based on agreed terms and conditions with our clients and meeting the standards that are expected of our services from our clients. We've been able to provide services in training, manpower, engineering. And we've basically had a gradual growth projection whereby we were only taking on projects that we had full capacity and ability to execute. When, if we go back a bit to when Nigeria started oil and gas exploitation, which was in Olubiri in 1956, from then till date, you could say the country has more than 43 years experience in terms of having developed expertise in the sector. Now, what we did, and which quite a number of companies are doing in Nigeria, is using that whole knowledge gain from having worked directly with the IOCs and to actually now provide services to the sector that we have full capability of being able to execute. We've also learned that the way of doing business before the 2010 Nigerian Content Act was put in place, whereby you saw more organizations satisfy local content by having agency type relationship, which was not adding to real value creation in the country. We saw that the government, in their wisdom, decided that it was time to ensure that value creation and value addition was being recognized fully in the sector. We saw and we took opportunity of that, and based on that, we as an organization have been able to project our growth and increase the kind of services that we're providing based on where we really have our strengths. Now, some of the limitations we saw when we first started was, aside the fact that there weren't that many opportunities, so you basically had quite a number of companies struggling for the same kind of business and trying as much as possible to outbid each other and being able to be given an opportunity. We also saw that lengthy bid tendering period to contract award time created opportunities where companies were set up and then companies basically went out of existence from waiting for the bids to actually be awarded. We also noticed that at different points in time, the price of crude and the availability of projects was one that made it very, very difficult for us to have projects that could sustain whatever investment that some of the local players were putting in on the table. In Deep Blue, what we did in order to ensure that we created ourselves and separated ourselves from, so that it will not be seen that we're just basically being provided opportunities to work solely because we're local, was to ensure that our technical expertise for any of the services that we were providing was one that met up to global best practices. So in ensuring that we were able to achieve that, we made sure we were ISO certified. We made sure that all technical requirements for any services that we wanted to engage in, we had full qualification and accreditations for them. We also made sure that we were very competent in whichever services that we provided. Getting access to finances is something that a lot of local companies actually point out to you at. We all know that the lending and access to funding in Nigeria can be quite tedious. But from when we started, because we wanted to be different, we had an open book, which kind of, I was nodding when both Barbara and Prof talked about transparency and accountability. We made sure we were open with our financiers to ensure that every project that we embarked on, we explained to them the technicality of the project, and they were easily onboarding in terms of supporting us to ensure that we don't have any challenges in being able to fund the projects that we decide to embark on in the sector. For us, we see 3 pillars for success of sustainable growth. The government, by creating and promoting indigenous and independent sectors that gives opportunities for local companies that have value to add, not just companies that are local and based on the fact that they are local, they have been awarded projects, but companies that have been nurtured and grown to be able to provide expertise in the particular sector that they are working along the value chain. We also believe that the government have a role to regulate and define licensing processes to ensure that permits that are given for service provisions are actually given to companies that have real credibility, and to companies that have the credibility and have the technical capability to be able to execute the project for which they've been given licenses or permits to operate. For the part of the E&P companies, we believe that for them, in dealing with local companies so that it is not seen that the local companies themselves are more of tick the box or burdens, like Barbara mentioned. There are companies that actually do have the ability to provide the service delivery to global best practice, and that the value addition and creation that is being seen is actually being appreciated by the E&P companies. We believe that working with a local company should be a two for price of one. A company that has technical capability to deliver, but a company that also, based on the fact that they are local, are able to help the E&P companies justify that the fact that they have a local company that they are working with. Not solely the fact that they're awarding or giving contracts to local entrepreneurs just because they are local. That in itself is not sustainable. It does not create any form of value addition. It does not help in any form of development for the country. For the indigenous players like ourselves, we believe that it is good to continually invest on human capital development. We believe that it is good to always invest in new technology. We believe that the oil and gas sector has progressively developed in the last decade, and that with each decade, new technologies are coming up. We believe that based on development of human capital development, we ourselves as the local companies have the ability to even come up with new technologies that will be welcome we believe that we as local companies will be able to introduce new technologies into the market if only we're ready to invest and see ourselves as not just companies or contractors that should be put on bids or given projects just to tick the box, but because we actually do have much to offer to the country, and we have a lot to offer to our region in terms of being able to be partakers in the sector in itself. Now, post-COVID, what do we see and how do we see Deep Blue performing? The COVID pandemic is one that created an unusual environment for all of us. In other words, both the local companies, both the known established E&P companies are all experiencing a new normal. It means that it is time now for us, as people that have gained some form of experience in the sector, that have invested a lot in human capacity development, to come up with ideas and technology that can help move the sector to a new normal that is easily productive for all of us. It means also that as local companies, we see ourselves, because I'm sure quite a number of local companies are already experiencing this right now, the fall in crude oil price. We heard the other day, the GMD talk about the fact that the Nigerian cost of production is one of the highest in the world. And off the top of my head, what comes to mind is the fact that in satisfying local content, maybe we have allowed for certain additions that should not be. So it means that at this point in time, what we need to be thinking about is how do we become creative in reducing the cost of production in Nigeria. And the one way of achieving that is by ensuring that we come up with we come up with bids this time around that are not loaded to satisfy local content, but we are actually providing services that are competitive. We'll also be looking at opportunities where people are actually providing services that they have full capacity and capability of providing, not just companies that are being awarded jobs before they are local. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is, I like your three pillars that must interact. I call it mutuality of interest. Government, international company, and international service company as well. I'll put the two of them together. And the third pillar, the indigenous company. And I like the fact that you emphasize competence and you emphasize capability. And you do not want to get any job as an indigenous company based on sentiment and patronage, because you want to practice global best practice. Excellent presentation, Anita. excellent presentation. Now I'm going to invite MD Yewande for the second polling questions. Then I will invite the GM, Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, later on.
Thank you very much, Prof. Can we please have the questions up? Thank you. So do you support regional collaboration in Africa? Yes or no? We'll give just a few seconds and then we can go ahead and have Doctor do his presentation. Thank you. Toby, please go ahead and show the results. Yes. Thank you. We can go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam MD. We appreciate the question. That brings home the point. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Kwame, who is the General Manager for Sustainable Development. He was introduced earlier. I'm going to ask him again to give us his presentation from the point of view of the purpose of local content, the challenges of local content, and the regionalization of local content beyond just the country where the corporations is operating. Thank you very much. The time is yours, 10 minutes, sir. When you see me.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. It's still afternoon here in Ghana, so I'm assuming it's the same everywhere. We had this conversation there at that time. I intend to stick to the 10 minutes, and I've enjoyed the discussion so far from Anita and Barbara and Prof. And Prof really did put the discussion in context by talking about the definitions. And then the long term, for me, what struck me was more of the long-term goals of local content regulations and policies around the continent. However, permit me to state that in my mind, there is no one-to-one mapping between these goals, these long-term objectives, and the steps that are needed to achieve them. And so different countries and different places should be allowed to probably learn as they go on. Yes, I understand the issues about, well, you learn from others. And so Ghana's experience is that our local content policy, like Prof put up, was more or less influenced by discussions with our brothers and sisters from Trinidad and Tobago, Nigeria. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
We can hear you.
Okay, so I can go on then.
Yes, please.
So I was saying that the evidence as far as local content, successes in local content in Ghana might not necessarily be as interesting as maybe Nigerian can share. I've listened to a couple of my Nigerian brothers and sisters, and they seem to have found a route to achieving this. And maybe that brings me to the issue of how these institutions are built, institutions to achieve the goals of local content. I've always believed that institutions that work for any country are not independent of the country's history. And so what works for one country does not necessarily work for others. Ghana has a long history of natural resource extraction, especially in gold. And the local content stories around mining gold and diamond was not very interesting. And so maybe Ghana could have developed its own local content regulations around its experience, its lived experiences relating to minerals. We have cities like Obuasi, which made Ghana one of the world's biggest gold producers. But Obuasi currently is a ghost town simply because somewhere along the line, the gold got exhausted and Anglo Gold Ashanti felt that it was no longer economic and they moved away and left Obuasi with nothing. And these are the experiences of Ghana and Ghanaians around the extractive sector. And so when we found oil, the expectation was that these lessons will influence the way we go about in seeing how the oil resources are managed and how it benefits Ghanaians as a whole. But in formulating the various local content policies and policy directions and acts and legislation, it looks like we missed that aspect of it, learning by doing. We've been allowed to also learn from, sometimes it's important to learn from your mistakes as well, because whenever you have to copy the blueprint from another country, whose attempt at developing that blueprint was informed by their history and the experiences with international companies, the experiences with their own governance systems, the experiences with the way politicians and the elite appropriate mineral resources to themselves. We would have probably put together better policies. Because, Prof, let me share something that is currently happening, and I believe in practical experiences. Prof mentioned the fact that one of the main tenets of local content development is capacity building, skills development, and so on. But on the 9th of June, 2020, that's just a few days ago, the Minister for Energy in Ghana wrote to Talu Oil PLC, based in the United Kingdom, relating to the purported appointment of a new managing director for Talu Ghana Limited. The long and short of this letter is that Ghana as a country is contesting the appointment of another foreigner to become the managing director of Talu Ghana Limited. And I cannot share the full details of the letter, but the basic summary is that Ghana doesn't think that Talu as an international company has been fair to Ghana in terms of developing the talents that are required to manage Talu Ghana in the long term. So for instance, the last two managing directors of Talu Ghana has been Ghanaians. And when the last one retires on the 30th of June, Talu International is appointing Mr. Wissam Al-Montari, who was previously the asset director. He's an Iraqi-Canadian based in London. And the minister's letter is basically saying that Ghana cannot accept the new structure of the executive management of Talu Ghana Limited, which now would have, if my counting is right, only two people based in Ghana who are Ghanaians out of the 9 executive management members of Talu Ghana Limited. And so virtually the rest, the 9 of them will be based in London. Their costs will be borne by Talu Ghana Limited. And meanwhile, the 2 jobs available to Ghanaians after 13 years of running Talu Ghana will be Director External Affairs, which will be based in Accra, and Associate General Counsel, who is a Ghanaian, also based in Accra. Every other person of the Talu Ghana Executive Management is a foreigner based in London and being paid from the resources produced by Talu Ghana. And then the minister even goes on to provide a very stark statistic. I'm bringing all these up to show the challenges the real challenges relating to, we all sometimes feel that people are paying lip service to local content and local participation and capacity development locally. Because the minister in his letter to Talu had said that if Talu had been very forthright and conscientious as far as their localization work is concerned, after 13 years, they wouldn't be appointing another foreigner to follow 2 other Ghanaians as managing director, because Talu Group is made up of 64 subsidiaries, of which Talu Ghana alone provides over 80% of the group revenue. However, the Talu Ghana, the only two Ghanaians on executive management, you look at the kind of positions they hold. I mean, I'm just putting this in context. It's nice to talk about, well, we need to replace foreigners with Ghanaians, and our IOCs should be committed to that. But practically, do the laws and the regulations we put in place, are we giving opportunity for people to wriggle around it? Because I'm sure this fight between the Ministry of Energy and of Ghana and Talu Ghana might not necessarily resolve what the minister wants. But this is the lived experience of Ghana as far as local content development is concerned. So I'm just a bit, I just want to learn a bit more. And, you know, this idea of local content, how successful. Nigeria has shown the way, but maybe Ghana also needs to think about its own systems, its own structures that will allow it to be more successful than just copying others. One of the experiences I've also learned about local content, which I've done a bit in the last few years trying to correct. And it's funny, I'm sure Prof knows my opinion about this. Sometimes our own procurement regulations, in our attempt to be international, I heard Barbara and Anita talk about the fact that you don't just have to win contracts because you are a local company. You need to be competent. But somebody needs to be ready to help you build that capacity over time for you to become competent. Maybe certain aspects of the industry is easier to build local competence in a quicker time, so that Nigerian companies, Nigerian consulting and Ghanaian consulting companies can catch up easily, because in terms of a human resource base, I still think we have some of the best around the continent. So it's easy when you're doing consulting. But how about the manufacturing bit, the capital base? How easy is it for a Nigerian to build up that capital base if they are not handheld from the beginning or at a certain stage, or given preferential treatment if you are starting from zero? I'm an economist, so I'm almost always focusing on, if you don't have the resources, somebody has to help you. In Ghana, until more recently, interest rates on CD loans was ranging between 28% and 32%. I'm wondering how a Ghanaian businessman can take a loan at those rates and compete for any job with any international company which requires capital, and which international bank or financial institution will give a Ghanaian-led businessman money to engage in, let's say, offshore production activities. And so we need a more, structured approach to doing this. If we're waiting for all Ghanaian companies to reach international standards before they can take part in the value chain or the supply chain, I'm sorry, it might never happen, because they might never be able to raise the capital to be able to compete. Because Ghana's own procurement laws will say, okay, competitive bidding. I understand the tenets of competitive bidding to make sure you have value for money and all those things. But I've always challenged Ghanaian politicians and people who preach this, that there's nothing in the procurement acts in Ghana that ensures that when somebody wins a contract based on open competitive bidding, it means Ghana has value for money. Because big companies will always influence the process by ensuring that a small company who is now coming into the game is kicked out because he has never done a job of that size before. But I always use a football analogy. Nobody scores goals by sitting on the bench. You have to be on the field to be able to score a goal. In the same way, if I'm a small company and I've never gotten the contract to supply, let's say, an FPSO, at what stage would I have the capacity to supply an FPSO? This is not to say that you should give contracts to people who are inefficient, but I'm just raising these issues so that we think aloud.
Well, thank you very much, my dear GM.
In terms of
very thoughtful. We are going to come back to you.
Okay.
You're going to have opportunity to answer some more questions. Let me now pause to invite Yewande for the third polling question before we go to our question and answer session. And please, quickly for our participant, thank you very much for coming. Please look at that Q&A button and send in your questions so that we can extend the discussion. Thank you, Yewande.
Yes, sir. So we already have 3 questions. So Prof, you can just look at the section there. So we'll get ready for the questions to be answered. For the next question, you can see it on your screen. Of the following commonly acceptable local content objectives, which one do we think is the most important? Please click on your answer. So we, the panelists, are not allowed to answer. I know my answer, but I won't say it's to distract others. So Prof, please go ahead. Toby, put the answers up.
Well, again, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I want to come to Anita with this question, then Barbara later. I have a question here on this, some of the idea that you raised on global best practice. Let me read the question directly to you. It said, how does local material and service providers go about assuring oil companies that their materials are up to world standard, looking at the way we do things? And I might be wrong, they said they'll go somewhere and then they will ask, oh, give me Nigerian standard, give me Ghana standard, and it's suboptimal. And looking at the asset value that cannot be destroyed with inferior materials, how can we assure that what is supplied by local participants meet the global world standard, looking at your experience?
Okay. So first, when I started, I talked about where I was coming from. And the truth about it was kind of frustrating working for an international company and trying to get local partners and being stuck with the fact that I had to work with them just because they're local. And it was also very frustrating when they were not ready to even try and learn what the business it was itself that they wanted to partner with us on. That's partner with me then when I worked there. Now, there's only one standard in the industry. For local goods and services, the good thing about the oil and gas sector is everything has systems and procedures. So whatever it is that you're buying, they are laid down acceptable standards that your equipment needs to meet. The fact that you're a local company does not mean you should cut down on it. My company is ISO certified. We did not become ISO certified just because we wanted to tick the box. We became ISO certified because the owners of the business themselves wanted to make sure that every single person, once they walk in through the door, know that we have a system and procedure by which we should all operate within. When local companies start to deliver goods and services based on the quality and expertise that they have, they would have more repeat businesses as against just being handed out projects. I understand where Dr. Kwame is coming from on the fact that the local players may not have all the technical capability to be able to jump in. But that is where you gradually grow to where you should be. When we started training, we did consulting. We have a longer term plan. Our full-term plan within the organization is to be a full EPCM contractor, but we're not there yet. We will not be able to defend and bid for certain kinds of jobs because we have not yet gotten the comfort level that we should, such that when we stand in front of our financiers, we say we want to bid for this job, they agree and believe with us and they support us on it. So I am personally of the opinion that local companies, when they bid for a job or when they want to do any job, they should go back and look at the basic standards for it. If you're into supplying boats, if you're into piping, there are laid down minimum standard. In fact, there is no minimum standard. There is a standard that you must achieve. We as local companies should always ensure that we are sticking to the best practice standards, develop ourselves to be able to meet up to it. I hope that answers the question a bit.
You are muted,
Sorry,
Professor.
Prof, I can't hear you.
He's still muted.
Let me on mute, sorry. I want to come to you because you have international experience. And for your company, cost is very important. And so there's this question from one of the participants, and which says that to rise cost of production because we want to do local content. It's about cost of production. Because this one gave an example of a particular country with suggesting that since local content came into being in that country, it appears that cost keeps going up. How can we make sure that the implementation of local content does not necessarily reduce the profit or investments return as a result of cost increment? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof, for the question. So I think, in my opinion, this goes back to one of the items we pointed out is the temptation to comply with local content requirements by adding local middlemen in the chain. And without naming a specific country or sector, we know there is a practice of local partners bidding by adding a markup on what our pricing level would be. Therefore, the end buyer, who is the L company, ends up with a higher pricing level. And I think this is what local content done wrong does. As surprising as it may sound, I'm a firm believer that when we put policies in place, the government has to be heavily involved and has to be consistent in its approach. A lot of the costs that are related to actual cost of production are related to taxes. And I believe that it's also a high level of government involvement that helps support a reasonable cost of operating for a company willing to comply with their local content obligations. As in, if you are going to make, for example, taxes on employment and social contributions lower on local employees than on expats, that is one way you can maintain the cost at a reasonable level for an external player to be complying with this local content regulation. I'll take an example. In my research, I found out that if you were to buy a heat exchanger, for example, manufactured in Brazil rather than overseas, it costs you 40% more. But you would do that because you want to comply with Brazil regulations. If the government was to make the exercise of looking back and asking the actors of that specific market, why is it so much more expensive to produce this material in Brazil as opposed to overseas? And understand if there are taxes or issues with a dearth of supply or competencies in that specific sector that is inflating the final cost of goods. It's by doing that exercise that we go back to the root of things and we find ways of how to keep the sector competitive. Because locally made products or locally worked does not have to be more expensive than using goods that are imported. It's actually counterintuitive if you think about it. If you have the raw material and you're manufacturing on site, there is no reason it would be more expensive. It might be the volume component, and thereby you have to guarantee to those suppliers a minimum amount of orders for them to keep their costs low. But it's going to be an effort that you make about thinking through the whole value creation chain. If you look just at the final cost, of course, it's going to seem as though because you've been using these local suppliers of this item and that other item and that other item, and you're using so many intermediaries to fulfill your obligations, your overall cost of production is higher. But it's only because we are not using the right KPIs. If you remember, I took the example of depending on which local content calculation you use, if you're assuming that using just a locally installed importer, you're meeting 100% of your obligation. And behind it, there's no value creation. These are the cases where I think we end up inflating the overall cost of production. And if
Excellent.
yes,
Excellent.
thank you.
Thank you very much for that remark on this particular question with respect to compromising standard for the sake of local content and the role of government in not being part of the reason why the cost is really going out. Now let me call to Dr. Kwame. I know there's nothing that you can exchange for practical experience, and I like the example you gave, which was actually quite apt. Let me read a question directly to you from one of the participants. Is it healthy to compromise on employees' competence under the desire to fulfill local content requirement? In that case, you want to hire the best engineer. Are you going to compromise the health of your business just to be able to fulfill the requirement? I mean, you can give us a generic. I know GNPC will not hire someone. I'm a living example of that if he's not competent. But will you do that in the oil and gas sector? Please unmute. Okay,
thank you very much, moderator. And I think my straight answer is no. However, let me share a question that I was asked. My first assignment as General Manager for Sustainability at GNPC. I was asked to meet the regional house, the Western Regional House of Chiefs. For those who don't know what it means. So Ghana has different regions. The oil find is offshore the Western region of Ghana. The various chiefs have a group called the Western Regional House of Chiefs, representing the chiefs and the people of the Western region who are fighting for a fair share of the benefits of the oil find. When I stepped into the house, one of the concerns of the chairman of the house was that he was not worried that, or he was not asking the oil companies to sacrifice competence on the door of local content. But what is the plan to make sure that 10 to 15 years down the line, nobody can still use competence as an excuse not to employ local people? So let me put it in context. The point he's trying to make is that, yes, we can use the argument that we shouldn't sacrifice competence for, local content, but what are the plans? That's why I use the Talu one as the minister was saying that if Talu had followed his own localization plan, by this time around, they would have trained a competent Ghanaian to fill that position. So yes, I'm not advocating for people to be hired because they are Ghanaians. I'm advocating for a system that provides, an opportunity for people to be trained to become competent so that they can fill positions over time, so that we don't continue using lack of competence as an excuse. Because there's a possible thing that for another 40 years, companies can use, you don't have the competencies locally, and that's why we are bringing foreigners. The question is, what plans do you have of making sure that you are helping to train the right people to get the jobs within the industry?
Very much. I know you will not compromise competence for the health of GNPC. I know that for sure. And those are
not even a single day.
And those are facts. Then the complaint, and Anita, I'm going to come back to you for another question. Again, if you have a succession plan with your local content. And I don't want us to reduce local content to just employment. And this is a question from Sadrach.
I agree, Prof.
Yeah. And this is a question from Sadrach. So what are some of the opportunities for entrepreneurs in the oil and gas sector whereby local content could be petroleum? Remember, it's about value creation and value addition. And the more value you are creating locally, the better for the economy. So what will you suggest are the opportunities where local content could be implemented? Having been a player yourself in terms of hiring contractor on a local content basis and becoming local content contractor yourself. What are these? Somebody wants to become your competitor. So over to you.
So first thing first, study the value chain of the oil and gas sector.
Excellent.
And it's amazing that the value chain entails almost every single day-to-day activities that quite a number of us are into. Catering, providing uniforms, you know, on the low-hanging fruit bed. Even if you decide you want to go on the technical aspect of it, you need to first of all study, understand the value chain, and then develop your competence, then go in for it. So, and I love to use my Deep Blue as an example of when we started and how we started working. 2 hours ago, I got a call from an IOC that was basically telling me, look, you know what? These are some of the challenges that we're having. I love the way your organization seems to be very good at problem solving, right? How do you think we should go about this? We're fully 100% Nigerian indigenous company. But guess what? We have talent that have known and understand the industry such that we are expertise in our own field, right? Which is what I was talking about, the fact that you can actually offer a service based on the fact that all of us are all on the playing field right now, yeah? So it means that if you want, for instance, you say you want to be an EPC contractor, which is the bigger one, you want to be one of the big boys. You need to start, first of all, to break down what does EPC contractor entails. It means that there has to be the engineering aspect of it, the procurement aspect of it, and then the construction. Where do you start? Do you have capability of providing engineering? If you don't have, what is your long-term plan? How do you start off to build up an engineering office? I remember, I think it was in 2002, 2003, when Agbami project started. Nigeria at that time had an Oil and Gas Design Engineers Association. Because we knew at that time that quite a number of the engineering jobs that were being done were not, Nigerians did not have the capacity or the capability to be able to execute it. There was collaboration between quite a number of engineering companies and houses that came together so as to build capacity. And 300,000 man hours out of the total engineering man hours for that job was set aside to train and develop in-country capability. For every single aspect of the value chain in the sector, my take is develop the capacity. Don't just hand over the job. How do you develop the capacity? You carve out a part of the job to develop the ingrown capacity. So if, for instance, you're on the catering bit, you know that you already have catering organizers, catering facilities in the country, and you need to develop local caterers. You need to let the local caterers know that in the oil and gas sector, these are our standards and systems of operation. It means that, for instance, if the woman, for instance, has sell food in the cooler, he can't just bring the food in the cooler like that. He needs to ensure that preparation is such that people do not eat and fall sick. And how do you ensure that? It means that she needs to have proper storage that meets HSC standards. The same thing applies for every other thing. It will take a long time to actually start to break each one of them. But the best way to go about it, anything you decide to take out of the full value chain in the sector, develop your expertise, get the needed certification and permits you need, and then go in and present it to the market. Believe me, once you're good in it, the market will come back. And because you're local, the IOCs are the operators. We want to keep working with you. Thank you.
And thank you very much. Yes, the value chain is expansive. even though we are concentrating on the upstream alone, we have the midstream and we have downstream, an opportunity to participate in each of the chain based on your competence and ability actually available. All right. Let me ask you, Barbara. There are two questions, and I know you've gone to Congo, you are in Nigeria, you have been to all over. And the problem is the standard of the local materials. And I'm going to just read the question directly. Say, how does local material and service providers go about assuring oil companies that their materials are up to the world standard? And there's another question that is related to that. How does Nigeria specifically, as a developing manufacturing nation, to compete economically with developed nations in supplying services and materials? And you know, you have experience because your company is the most diverse international company that I know, with different workers from different parts of the world, because they always look for the best wherever you are. How do you marry these two important components, standard and availability, and the fact that the industry is highly capital intensive? What are your advice for local providers to ensure global standard for the materials for the oil and gas industry?
Okay, thank you, Prof, for the questions and the compliments for my company. I'll gladly accept them.
Well,
So,
I've known them for 40 years.
I think Mrs. Anita covered the question of standard extremely well. As in, the standards are known in the industry. One thing I wanted to add in relation to that is not to underestimate education. And again, to have consistency in compliance and monitoring. So what do I mean by that? If you ask me why today Indonesia can have such a high local content component, I worked 4 years in Indonesia. When I left an Indonesian in my position. I left an Indonesian that I had made the commitment to train for the time I was in Indonesia, and that was earmarked to replace me. What that means is that the Indonesian government makes sure that there is a continuity in the implementation of the promises the IOCs and the foreign companies make in terms of developing local content and talent. Now, my fellow colleague actually did not stay in the job. Why did she not stay in the job? Because she had been working on her own at starting a service company with other colleagues. The reason she was able to do that is because she knew by then the sector in and out. She knew she could rely on being supported by the government, and she knew that the MIGAS, which is the ministry in Indonesia for oil and gas, had several programs of competency building for the local entrepreneurs to actually learn about international standards and how to meet them. So it goes back to teamwork, essentially. Everybody has to carry part of the load. The way we make sure that local players can uphold the applicable standards, one is by knowing them. Two is by continuous education. It's making sure that as a country, you take the ownership of continuously developing your local entrepreneurs and making sure that they stay abreast of all the regulations that are applicable. Now, I saw a question in the Q&A, somebody's asking how they would get a step on the ladder once they have all the paperwork in order if they don't have the competency. And my question is, why do you have the paperwork in order if you don't have the competency? Why have you been recognized as an accepted player in the industry if you have not been able to demonstrate that you have the competency? I think this is one step that is broken in a lot of the countries, is the fact that we give licenses to people to operate when they have not demonstrated that they understand the industry, they understand the applicable standards, and there is no system for them to actually develop that understanding and nurture their professional development. So for me, it goes back to what you require from the international players coming and the steps you take. The final example I'm going to take is Senegal. So today, I think most of you are aware, Senegal still doesn't produce oil, but Senegal has a petroleum engineering university that has been running for 3 years. They have been preparing. When they launched the license rounds that Woodside acquired, at the same time, they hired an ex-Schlumberger to head a petroleum engineering school in country. So it's all part of planning ahead. It's not going to happen by chance. It's about making sure that all the elements are in the picture. It's about making sure that you're not only relying on those who are coming into the country, you're also making the step of developing competency for your people on your own. And this is not something we can consistently rely on IOC as part of their CSR plan. This is something we have to take ownership in all the African countries and learn from what the other countries have done. I hope that kind of answers the question, Prof. You're muted again.
I would like you to be as brief as possible so I can attend to some of these questions. Our time is almost up. Again, I'm going to come to you, my dear GM. And my question has to do with finance. Financing local oil and gas projects is a major setback in stimulating indigenous industrial upspring in the petroleum sector. What do you think Ghana, and also through GMPC, is going to do with, because I can give the example of NCDMB, with the fund that they have in NCDMB to be able to help build capacity so that indigenous can participate. Can you share any experience with us, what you are trying to do? I know you have, through the government approval, made money available to develop competence. What other things are you doing for indigenous people who are really interested in entering the industry to fulfill the local content regulations?
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. Like you said, GMPC, that is even more recently, has taken the position that the last speaker just made, that whatever capacity developments, whether it's individual skills or for companies, will not come necessarily by relying on foreign companies that are coming in. As a country, we might need to do some investments of our own to make sure that this happens. So on the part of GMPC as a national oil company, and as you are aware, in terms of capacity development, we have started one of the such processes with a program that allowed you to count on West African expertise. And Prof, you say are you still referred to as a West African or a Canadian? So that I can. So what we're trying to do here is to leverage on the expertise around the sub-region like Prof. So we set up 4 professorial chairs. My idea here specifically was that in terms of the quality of the personnel within our universities, sometimes we are not much different from what is available elsewhere on the international scene. Sometimes it's more about the tools that they have to work with, especially the engineering divisions and so on. Where we don't think we have the necessary capabilities, we need to import. That one I'm first to concede. And that is why we set up those 4 professorial chairs in 4 of our top universities. For instance, your colleague at the University of Science and Technology is helping retool the equipment that will allow us to train people in the right way. However, we're also convincing them to provide support to local entrepreneurs in terms of retraining their staff to bring them up to the international best practices that we all believe that the oil industry requires. And so GMPC is putting money in. We're building schools of petroleum studies. For instance, Prof, I can tell you that the University of Mines and Technology is coming up. They have a School of Petroleum Studies coming up. I'm sure it should be done by the end of this year. We are trying to, in the Western region, particularly where the oil find is, we are supporting, we had a collaboration with the Sekendi Takrady Chamber of Mines, the Chamber of Commerce, where they have, entrepreneurs in there, where GMPC is providing funding to help them build their skills or giving them projects, limiting certain projects to them, low-level projects that will allow them to have some basic skill improvement before they can even think about coming into the mainstream supply chain for the oil and gas industry. So like my colleague said, we might need to build capacity slowly. Even if it's finances, you cannot just give somebody $5 million because you think that you need to help him get into the supply chain within the oil and gas industry. You need to make sure that the person or that organization has that capability to handle even that amount of money to be able to compete effectively. So, Prof, time is not on our side. I can just mention, especially capacity development. That is a key place for GMPC. We are doing this across the universities in Ghana. For the records, every year we provide 1,000 Ghanaians with local scholarships to help, especially in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And it's wonderful to see the number of Ghanaian youth who are interested in the sciences but couldn't go to universities purely because they couldn't even buy the university application forms. And that for us is very satisfying because we are using part of the oil money to prepare the next generation. In terms of technical and vocational training, we feel that as a very young oil and gas country, that would be an area, a low-hanging fruit where Ghanaian trained, people can work. Welding and those things is easier. So we are spending money in that area to train the next generation of people so that they can set up their own businesses. I'm a firm believer in young graduates not thinking about how they can get employed, but how they can employ somebody else. And so if we can give them these transferable skills, that's the next stage for the Ghanaian, at least local content development, training them to be able to.
Thank you, boss. Thank you, boss. I just have so many questions. I wish you can go for another 2 hours, but I'm going to give you, I still want to go one question round, one question for Anita, one question for Barbara, and then I'll start with the GM to give me their 2 minutes, 2 minutes take away from here. If there's 1 or 2 sentences that you want the press to hammer on, what will it be? And maybe I can just do it this way. I'm going to ask this question, and then you take additional 2 minutes to give me your takeaway. Then I will invite you one day when I come to the, I will give the GM, Kwame, the opportunity. My question, I'm going to give the question to the both of you, and perhaps Kwame, and then you just round up with your 2 minutes final remark. Anita, 40 years ago, and this question is directly from the audience, I worked for Shell. 40 years ago. And when I look at the indigenous participation in the oil and gas industry today, majority of the key players from the local content point of view would participate in work in Shell as well. Now we have these indigenous players. And somebody is asking question on capacity building within indigenous company and equal compensation in payment. I mean, one of the problems I have with local people, and I want you to address it to our audience, is the fact I don't see you guys training your workers the way you were trained when international company hired you. How can we, in a way, convince the public that this local content philosophy is good for them. Just looking at that example that I gave to you, majority of the participants today in the indigenous component of Nigerian oil and gas industry were trained in Shell. So after my bachelor's degree, they sent me to Holland for 16 weeks. You are doing contracting and casualization. Equal payment, is it within the local content domain? If not, what can be done? And then for Barbara, the question that somebody wants to know is red tape. Yes, you have the competence. Yes, you even have the money. But the contractual process is so difficult. What would be your recommendation? And for GM, in your roundup, I want you to address, and I'm not putting you on the spot, that you are the national company that we have here. And it says, lack of political will as bane of the local content policy. There may be an obvious gap between policy formulation and policy implementation. Weak institutional capacity, policy inconsistencies, and corrupt practices. How do they affect local content expectations to deliver sustainability? Again, use this as the springboard to give me your final remark as well. Thank you very much. And I'll begin with Anita, then I'll go to Barbara, and the GM will round up, and I will invite Yewande for the final remark.
Very interesting question. It almost seems like now we have local, but it seems like the local companies are actually worse employers than when we had the foreign companies there. So I'll share our own experience. When Deep Blue started, one of the things we did was, I remember we used to have our retreats in Dubai. We were smaller then. And I think there was a time a friend saw us in Dubai and there were about 20 people there about. And he was like, what's happening? I said, oh, it's my team. You know, I need them to understand that we're global, we are aspiring to be a global company. And they need to understand how things are aside just their own environment. And it was interesting when we got back how the mindset of a lot of the employees changed. Now, back to training and local companies. When a company is well structured and it has systems and procedures in place, part of the systems and procedures that you have in place are actually capacity development within the organization in itself. I do work for, aside from having IOCs as my clients, I do have some independents that are owned by ex-Shell employees. And I do know they have training plans for their employees. It may not be across all marginal field owners or the local employers that you have in Nigeria, but I will tell you that for a lot of people that set up their organizations after having been exposed to either working for multinationals or for the IOCs, tend to somehow have it in their DNA to keep working in the system that they were trained and exposed to. So I wouldn't want us to think that because the local companies are now taking up, then it seems like it's better, you know, when we had the foreign companies or the players there. So because from my own point of view, from what we've seen, and also from having clients that are indigenous independents that were either Shell trained or thereabout, we work with them in our consulting bid, and we do know that they do have training plans for their employees. Now, in terms of compensation, right? The compensation packages that the, sorry, I don't, Prof, did you say anything about compensation? So I don't jump into a question that's not related to me. I think mine is more of just training, right?
Compensation and contracting, where you use contract staff or casual
Okay.
staff.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of contract staff, right? One of the things I remember when I was dealing with one of my IOCs that we provide consultants to was in trying to look at a wage differential between Nigerians and expats, and also look at whether or not people should be paid based on the expertise that they bring on the table or based on the fact that they are local or not. I would say that before in Nigeria, a couple of years back, yes, there was some serious disparity between salaries of locals and expats. Right now, there's still some level of disparity. I guess when you have a country of 200 million people and you have quite a number of thousands of engineers that graduate from the university every year, demand and supply will be what will be determining, the real wage that people fall within. If it's almost like if you're trying to get an instrumentation engineer or you're trying to get a QA/QC engineer, depending on the technical capability or the scarcity or the availability of that resource in itself will determine what the correct wage would be. I hope that answers the question.
Your takeaway quickly, 1 minute.
For us, we have ticked the box in terms of learning the ropes in the oil and gas sector. Yeah. As a local Nigerian company that is basically looking at taking on to the rest of the world and what the world has to offer, the oil and gas sector has one standard. For us and for a lot of other indigenous companies that come on board, we think it's an insult to be giving jobs just solely because we are local. We have the capability. The country and the region has developed a lot of intelligent people that are working for lots of multinationals. And when they come out and they decide to set up, they do have the ability to provide you with best in class services. And we believe that we should be given the opportunity to exhibit this. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Barbara. You want me to repeat the question?
So I think the question was about red tape, Prof.
Red tape,
What
yes.
you were asking. So how to go beyond the red tape when you have the capacity, you have the competence, and yet you're still not given the chance to contribute. So the red tape is there for everybody. And I think from the perspective of having worked for a multinational, what I can assure you is there's red tape all over. It isn't just for the local players. It's there for everybody. And it's something I would be tempted to kick the ball back to a government representative if there was one on this call. But what I can share is my experience and our collective experience about how to go beyond the red tape. And it's an experience that applies to all walks of life. It's about building your brand and building your network. Because what it comes down to is understanding where the red tape comes from. And understanding that when you come across it, you can either try to go through or go around. You can try to figure out how to work with the people who have already gone around it that you can learn from. And it goes back to one of the points I made in my presentation about establishing the right partnerships. Miss Anita told us that all the multinationals are looking for local partners to work with. But what holds them back a lot of the time is the elements of risk. It's because once you have shared equity, once you have your own brand attached to a smaller company, you are actually putting your brand on the table. So it's important for smaller players to build their own brand and build their network. And not to hesitate to piggyback on people that are known. I mentioned the case of my colleague who left Schlumberger to go and start a company. It wasn't just about the individual competencies she was bringing. It was about these people recognizing that what she brought on the table was also a certain level of connection and knowledge about how things would get done. And I think as a lot of local companies are very uh, close to their what I would call their own turf, being scared about letting go of the ownership, being scared about bringing other players, like, this is my thing, this is my business, I've built it from the ground, I'll do it on my own. You bringing somebody has to be linked to what they bring. It's not necessarily about losing equity. Accepting to partner with a bigger player that has access is you taking the first step towards eventually maybe becoming as big as this player. Miss Anita said it. She said, today what Deep Blue looks like is not their end of the road. They have much bigger plans, but they recognize that they have to build the brand. They have to build their network to be a bigger player in the industry. And I think for me, that's the main takeaway, is that you have to recognize who else has figured out how to break the red tape and have the humility sometimes to go and ask to partner with the right people, maybe to let go of a bit of your equity in return for that access. That is you building towards bigger things. It takes time to accept it, but it's really you building towards bigger things. And I think if I was to round up my takeaway today, is that this applies to everything we're going to do about local content. If we go back to our initial question of the day, it was about how we enhance sustainability. And we can only do that with local content is an unmovable piece of sustainability. You have to have it, but it's not enough. It has to be local content done right. It has to be local content that works with sustainable work practices, not local content that is perceived to be taking advantage of the local workforce, not paying them well, taking shortcuts, simply acting as a face or a front for some people with money to put in the sector. So it goes back to my next other very important, which I kept making throughout this, which is compliance, monitoring, and the KPIs you use to monitor, right? Is if the basis is right about how you measure local content, then you will make sure that it actually contributes to a sustainable industry. But if you haven't got that piece right, you kind of carry along the mistakes. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent exposition. GM, over to you. The political will.
So I'll make it quick. But before I do that, just a quick comment on something Barbara said in talking about going around the red tape. And it comes to something that I should have said when you asked me the question about the finance bit. One of my observations across Ghana, West Africa, or probably Africa, is that most Africans and Ghanaians want to own 100% of a small company rather than 20% of a big company. So you hardly see a lot of partnerships amongst themselves. So we can sit here and blame IOCs for not helping, the banking sector for not helping, but sometimes our own cultural dispositions also affect our ability to raise finance. So I just linked it to the comment that Barbara made, but it's a point that I'm very passionate about, how we can get Africans to come together and build a bigger thing rather than every person possessing 100% of something. It's a way to go around the financing challenges. In terms of the political will, let me admit, I work for a state-owned organization, so I should be first to understand the challenges of the lack of political will. And Prof, my real concern might not even be about policy formulation. It's more about policy inconsistencies. Anytime there's a change in government, policy around local content and oil and gas sector policies change. And so the ability of, let's say, a state-owned company like GNPC to build policies and systems that allows them to support industry in Ghana is challenged by policy inconsistencies. And so we need to deal with that. For me, it's a major issue to the extent that once foreigners realize that there are no policy consistency and the national oil companies are undermined, they're able to go behind them, seek political favors, and by the time you, the local player, you want to get them to conform to even what is written down in the PA, they've gone to powers above you, gotten concessions, and there's nothing you can do. So policy formulation, policy implementation, but really the challenge, Prof, to me is policy inconsistencies. My takeaway from this webinar, and I think I'm grateful to Barbara and Anita for the experiences they've shared, and the fact that we need to recognize that the oil and gas sector is a global sector. So you cannot have one set of standards for local companies and a different set of standards for international companies. However, my position is that there has to be a way. Either government takes the lead or national oil companies take the lead for us to build local companies to be able to reach these standards. It will not just come out by wishful thinking. Somebody has to make a conscious effort to build them. Thank you very much.
And I think this has been very informative, educative, and then my panelists, I think you score A+. I think we need to find a way to repeat this. Personally, I've gained a lot. And if I can summarize, I like the 3-pillar approach to be able to deliver local content. Government interacting with international OCs and oilfield services, and competent indigenous company. And I like the idea that it is about value creation and value addition, not just making millionaires. And I also like the idea of competence, understanding the industry and see what is it that I'm going to be capable of doing. And you move one step at a time. Don't jump into a particular sector of the oil and gas industry where you are not competent. And it's not about you, it's about the nation in general. How can you sustain the business? Again, I want to thank you very much. There may be need for us to grant some preference in certain area to goods that are made, but we need to make sure there is consistency in policy. And above all, it is better to be a chief financial officer of a big company than a CEO of a small company. Perhaps partnership may be the way to deliver local content, not forced marriage, but understand. You're not going to force one company to join another company by force, but let like-minded work together so that we can have a local company to become Shell tomorrow in an international setting. It has been a pleasure. This is a brilliant platform that I personally enjoyed and have learned. Over to you, Yewande, for the final remark.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think this is a good time to let everyone know that if you would like to continue this conversation with Prof, he runs our training for oil and gas, economics, and introduction. So if you do want to have a conversation with Prof, please register for our training course. Thank you very much to all our speakers. I gained so much from that. I think a few takeaways from me. Prof already said a few of them, but for me, I think collaboration, and I know that we've mentioned this before in one of our meetings, that what is local? You know, is it local to Nigeria, local to Ghana? But collaborations, local, which is whatever country you're in, or local to your neighboring. I think regional collaboration is something we should be considering, because growing together would only mean success for Africa as a whole. So that's one thing I thought to highlight there. I think Prof also mentioned competence and the importance of measuring it and also showcasing it, so people do know that this is what your company is good at. Technology also, I think one thing we need to remember about technology is that it moves very fast. So you as a local company, you need to ensure that you're updating your knowledge and expertise. I think for me, it was something Anita mentioned, and it was transparency and accountability. for you to have funders backing you, I beg your pardon, it's important for you to be transparent. Let them know what you're going through, share your numbers, your real numbers, and I'm sure they would support as they can. So yes, again, thank you very much, distinguished speakers, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. We really do appreciate you. Also, our next session is coming up on the 24th of June. This time we're speaking to Amy Jadesini of Lador. She'll be speaking on how petroleum sector can support sustainable development and diversification. So very similar to what we've discussed today, but the focus would be on sustainable development. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us directly at the Energy Institute, which is einigeria@energyinst.org. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I hope you found this very informative. We look forward to hosting you again soon. Thank you.
Are we still taking the picture?
Yes, Toby, can we see your face? It's important for everyone to know that you are here.
Please, please sit down so that we can take a snapshot. Have you done it, Toby?
Yes, working on it. Good evening, everybody.
Yeah. All right, please, let's sit down and be handsome and beautiful. We are.
Thank you, it's done.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you very
thank you very much and congratulations. GM, my kind regard, and we'll talk offline.
We'll open the border soon for you to come in.
All right. I miss being there, so I hope I get to come soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was great meeting all of you. Very good.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Barbara.
Bye-bye, Miss Anita. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank